Hello, I'm Noah Colwyn, and welcome to this bonus episode of Season 5 of Blowback, National Treasure. This episode is a broad overview of a major crime perpetrated against Cambodia, primarily during the period of our story, the systematic looting of culturally significant art and antiques. You can actually still see the effects of this theft and vandalism when you visit the country. For example, when Brendan and I visited the historic Angkor Wat Temple City, we saw numerous statues missing heads and torsos, and others that had to have been reconstructed. And although we're specifically talking about Cambodia this episode and this season, the phenomenon of antiquity looting, it crops up in other stories that we've covered on Blowback. Listeners to Season 1 may recall the looting of Iraqi museums and sites of national heritage. Not long after the 2003 invasion, in the words of Smithsonian Magazine, at Baghdad's Iraq Museum, quote, thieves had plundered an estimated 15,000 items, many of them choice antiquities, ritual vessels, heads from sculptures, amulets, Assyrian ivories, and more than 5,000 cylinder seals, end quote. In Afghanistan, per Season 4, Mujahideen and the Taliban have for years alternately destroyed ancient un-Islamic religious objects or trafficked them on black markets. And in South Korea, a la Season 3, there are ongoing efforts to recover more than 190,000 cultural objects from abroad, primarily from Japan and the United States. But, like I said, we're talking about Cambodia. In that country, writes the author Masha Lafont in her book Pillaging Cambodia, Khmer objects of art started to become globally desirable in the 1950s and 60s. Then, more and more foreign diplomats and businessmen were visiting Indochina and acquiring a taste for the 1,000-year-old Hindu and Buddhist figurines and statues and other works of art that marked the countries. And while Khmer antiquities had been pilfered by the French back in the colonial days, it was the 1970s that intensified whatever of this new style looting was going on. The stealing, writes Lafont, quote, was initiated by American soldiers and officials based in neighboring Thailand during the Vietnam War, on the one hand, and by the Cambodian army of Lon Nol that needed money to fight the Civil War, on the other, end quote. But Lafont continues, the main trafficking we are talking about today started probably as early as 1977 to 79, the years of the Khmer Rouge. It is then that the first Polaroid snapshots and even catalogs started to appear with the orders that the art dealers were placing with Cambodians living in refugee camps. After the national liberation in January 1979, the easiest way to make some money in the impoverished country was to sell and traffic everything that could be found, end quote. But it would not be until later in the 1980s when the illegal art market would again reignite as Vietnam wound down its Cambodian occupation. But this time, the boom would last much longer than a few years. It extended through the 1990s as Cambodia's political troubles worsened. What led to this Khmer art trafficking boom? Part of it was because of the weak central government in Phnom Penh, which did not have the resources to protect the country's unique cultural heritage. Lafont explains, quote, most of this heritage, over 1,000 of the unknown temples and unexcavated sites that are often known only to the local people, are situated in the middle of the vast forests and jungles with no roads and no means of access. The regions are very isolated, and many of them have remained heavily mined after the wars, which also makes it difficult for archaeologists and police to have access to or guard the temples, end quote. Another reason for the takeoff in the antiquities trade was the arrival of new diplomats amid the UN election and the activities of other dignitaries in a newly peaceful Cambodia. Diplomats are a bigger danger than tourists, one UNESCO official said. Very many diplomats have their houses full of ancient Cambodian objects, he continued. When they move to their next post, they probably take all of it with them. And a final reason for the explosion in the looting of Khmer art is Thailand. The country is a historic smuggling conduit from Indochina to the West, and whose capital city, Bangkok, quote, still remains among the first-ranked cities for organized crime and the underground art trade, end quote. And Khmer art would not be able to reach these illegal markets abroad without its specifically Thai path. The criminologist Simon Mackenzie and the archaeologist Tess Davis, the latter of whom now heads the advocacy group the Antiquities Coalition, which fights art looting. They mapped out this journey of a smuggler in an influential study published in 2014. The two identified a specific smuggling channel that had 4 major nodes through which Khmer art was brought out of Cambodia and into Bangkok before heading west. The first node is a regional broker in the Cambodian border city who would organize the looting of the statues and then had them delivered to the city. The second node would be 2 organized criminals, more mobster types, who acted as the northwestern hub for Cambodian statue traffic, buying from regional brokers like the guy in the first node and delivering the loot to the Thai-Cambodian border. And the third node would be somebody to receive the loot on the Thai side of the border, who would then take delivery of these statues and move them to Bangkok. And then finally, and fourth, there is an internationally connected dealer. This guy is based in Bangkok, and it's he who is the quote-unquote Janus interface between the licit and illicit trades. From the 1970s to the 1990s, thousands of Cambodian temples were looted of their valuables, which were then smuggled through networks like these. But we should be paying the most attention to the final node in this network, the internationally connected dealer, because he's the one with the most power, who makes the most profit, and who pays off the officials in Cambodia, Thailand, wherever, to get deals done. And for the remainder of this episode, we're going to focus on one dealer in particular, Douglas Latchford. Although you can't really put a price tag on this sort of thing, Douglas Latchford might have been one of the biggest thieves by sheer value in modern history. Born in India in the years of the British Raj in 1931, Latchford was an early, young admirer of the Cambodian temples and Khmer culture that was being fastidiously documented by French archaeologists. According to Tess Davis, quote, Latchford became a familiar sight at the ruins, so abundant in sacred statuary that French explorers had praised them as open-air museums. Yet having guarded their sanctuaries for centuries, these precious gods vanished in Latchford's footsteps. By the 1960s, local expatriates were calling him Dynamite Doug for his preferred method of extracting buried treasures. End quote. In his home city of Bangkok, Latchford was also known as the president of the Thailand Bodybuilding and Physique Sports Association. Bodybuilding is a popular sport in the country, and Latchford was its preeminent private patron. Asians have good physiques, he once told the Phnom Penh Post. With proper diet and training, we can succeed. How did Latchford get away with such open wealth from looting? Aside from lying in interviews to reporters about the source of his income, Latchford recast his vast collection not as stolen or looted, but as instead having some kind of legit origin story across a large number of self-published books. And he donated enormous sums to charity in Cambodia, such as $195,000 for lighting in the National Museum in Phnom Penh. Latchford was further recognized with government awards and praise for his efforts to save Khmer culture, because that was Latchford's publicly stated motive. If the French and other Western collectors had not preserved this art, he said in an interview with the New York Times, what would be the understanding of Khmer culture today? In the same interview, Latchford, who believed in reincarnation, also said that two Buddhist priests once told him that, quote, in a previous life, I had been Khmer, and that what I collect had once belonged to me. Now, the reason that Latchford was, by the early 2010s, talking to the New York Times at all was because experts had begun noticing that Latchford-sourced antiquities bore substantial evidence of being looted, and they were coming up for auction and public notice at esteemed houses like Sotheby's. First hit with a civil suit by the Justice Department in 2012, Latchford was criminally charged in autumn 2019 with, per the press release, wire fraud, smuggling, conspiracy, and related charges pertaining to his trafficking in stolen and looted Cambodian antiquities. End quote. And less than a year later, Latchford was dead, aged 88. But his story isn't quite over. In 2021, many of the Latchford family's financial dealings were revealed in the so-called Pandora Papers, a leak of the offshore accounts of dozens of prominent politicians, business leaders, criminals, and all three combined. The International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, or ICIJ, which published the leak, provided details on Latchford's dealings. Quote, trust and corporate registration records obtained by ICIJ show that 3 months after U.S. investigators began linking Latchford to looted artifacts, he and family members set up the first of two trusts, named after the Hindu gods Skanda and Siva, on the island of Jersey, a secrecy haven in the Channel Islands between England and France. The Skanda Trust held Latchford's antiquities collection. Among its treasures were bronzes of Buddha, Lokeshvara, and other religious figures. One of the relics was a looted Naga Buddha valued at $1.5 million. Latchford's assets in the Skanda Trust were later transferred to the Siva Trust. While Latchford's family members said the trusts were formed for tax purposes and estate planning, the secrecy surrounding them poses difficulties for investigators seeking to find and repatriate items that he may have looted. Cambodian officials said that they don't know what items the Skanda Trust held, and that they have never heard of the Siva Trust. They consider Khmer relics taken from the country without permission to be looted and want them back, and have assembled a team to track down thousands of them. End quote. The Cambodian government, as you might expect, has had limited success in recovering the stolen loot, from Latchford as well as other sources. In the past year, after some serious public shaming, museums that possessed Latchford-looted objects began to return them to Cambodia. An incomplete list of these institutions returning Cambodian objects includes the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, the Denver Art Museum, and the National Gallery of Australia. Other museums linked to Latchford, however, have not taken this action. As of this recording, while they may be looking into the provenance of these objects, places such as the Cleveland Museum of Art or the Dallas Art Museum have not revealed their findings, nor have they announced any plans to return stolen objects to Cambodia. In December 2023, 60 Minutes ran a special segment on art theft from Cambodia, focusing on the efforts to prosecute and recover artwork taken via the Latchford network. In the piece, Anderson Cooper interviews a senior official at the Met Museum in New York about the looted objects. The moment is revealing. Prestigious museums like the Met may be the highest profile buyers of stolen antiquities, but they are only one player in a murky, opaque market. Billionaire private collectors, such as Latchford himself, have no reason to open up their books or to publicly trace the origins of what they have. After all, it was only because Latchford was caught up in the Pandora Papers leak that the museums came under new scrutiny and were moved to return the Khmer objects. try as the Cambodian government might, unless it has the extensive and enthusiastic cooperation of the Western governments whose citizens are the buyers of these objects, the Cambodians will be fighting yet another uphill battle for the foreseeable future.